Yeah, we're there.
We're there.
Brilliant. Okay. Hello, everyone. This looks like a podcast where we're going to talk about books, doesn't it? The backgrounds. So welcome to this live podcast broadcast here from the Leeds Library as part of Leeds LitFest 2022. I'm Molly McGrath. I'm the projects assistant at the Leeds Library, and I've got with me here author Stephen May, whose new book, Sell Us the Rope, is out today, and that's published by Sandstone Press. Stephen May grew up in Bedford and has written 6 novels, including Life, Death, Prizes, which was shortlisted for the Costa Novel Award and the Guardian Not the Booker Prize. He has also been longlisted for Wales Book of the Year and won the Media Wales Readers' Prize for his first novel, Tag, or TAG, I'm not sure. He's also written plays for television, as well as writing creative writing textbooks. Welcome, Stephen.
Hello, very pleased to be here.
Thanks for being on the podcast, and massive congratulations for your book coming out today. I suppose we better talk about it.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah.
So Sell Us the Rope seems like a kind of a significant departure from your previous work in that it's an historical novel. And it's set in London in May 1907, and it's about a young Stalin. Without giving too much away, can you tell us a little bit more about the premise?
Well, the Bolsheviks, the revolutionists, as they were called at the time, had to do a conference in London in 1907. They'd been forbidden permission to hold it in Russia itself. They tried to hold it in Stockholm. They tried to hold it in Oslo. None of those areas wanted to have them, and they found themselves in London because London was the only place that would allow them to hold their conference. So they held it in the Brotherhood Church in Hackney, and they were all here. It wasn't just Stalin. Stalin was 29. Interesting moment for Stalin. He's 29, fairly recently married. A new father. His son was only 3 months old. He was the guy at that time who was organizing the bank robberies that financed the Bolsheviks. He had also previously been a published poet, and there were persistent rumors at the time, never proven, that he was a spy for the Tsar's secret police. So he was a man sort of had a lot going on in his life, and all the others were there as well. So Lenin was there, Trotsky was there, Maxim Gorky was there, Rosa Luxemburg was there, and just the idea of all those people gathering in the East End of London was at that time was a sort of fascinating one for me. And the more I read about it, the more I wanted to read more about it and then write about it. So and it seemed an incident, a time. It's 3 weeks he was over here. Some strange things happened. He formed a kind of bond with the 13-year-old son of his landlord, a boy called Arthur Bacon, who used to rip him off, Stalin used to send him out for errands to get sweets, and Arthur would overcharge him for those errands. And there were lots of female delegates there to the conference who were offered weapons training in the evening and judo training in the morning, and they were a figure of fascination to the press at the time. So they were called the girl nihilists. So all of this stuff was going on at the same time, and it seemed it hadn't been written about before, not in a way that revealed the drama of it. And also we knew some things that the various people there had got up to, but there were enough gaps that I could fill them in myself. So
I learned recently that Arthur Ransom was a kind of a spy in Russia for a period, and he also lived in London briefly in this kind of bohemian society in the East End, but then he went to Russia and cozied up with Lenin and Trotsky, and which is wild. Swallows and Amazons. What? So what was your research process like for this book, aside from, I guess, reading?
Reading lots of books. Research now looks like every other kind of work, doesn't it? It's a small screen. in the corner of your room. But the British Newspaper Archive was brilliant, so I used a lot of contemporary accounts. So that the Daily Mirror had been set up in 1905 as a newspaper for women, and it had a lot of women journalists, but it hadn't really worked. So suddenly they found themselves, women hadn't bought the Daily Mirror, and so they were, so they'd repositioned themselves as a political paper competing with the Daily Express, but they still had some, as well as political stories, or they still wanted to give a kind of women-centered edge to the coverage. So that's where you got a lot of coverage about these women delegates, and who tended to be younger, tended to be more left-wing than the other delegates who'd been to several conferences before. So it was so I would say, in terms of research, those contemporary newspapers, as well as the reminiscences of people that had been there, some of which were contradictory. Stalin himself seems to have kept a really low profile, which was quite good for me. And they called him a grey man. That's in fact, for a while, the title of this book was going to be A Grey Man in London. Publishers didn't really like it, and it was actually the publishers who came up with "Sell Us the Rope," which is a quote from Lenin. When we come to hang the last capitalist, he will sell us the rope. Lenin said. So, there's a lot. So it's kind of a spy story. It's kind of a romance as well. As Stalin was always interested in romantic encounters, but also it's a sort of exploration, I guess, and accidentally timely of the kind of pressures that might, all the kind of childhood wounds that might push someone into becoming the kind of monster that Stalin became later, and that Putin has become now. Is what is the springboard for that.
Yeah, I wonder if that kind of idea of him as a grey area, that he kind of, there's not the most information out there about him, means that it's kind of more interesting to then fictionalize that. How do you decide when to kind of merge fact and fiction? When do you kind of narrativize something as opposed to kind of sticking to the facts?
It's a really good question, and without a satisfactory answer, it's like it's because you are guided by intuition. You're almost guided by a sense of smell or something. In the end, I decided, there's a great book about the assassination of Heydrich, actually, by Lawrence Binet. HHHH is called, which is pronounced ha 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 in French, in the original French. And he says fiction respects nothing. And I think in the end, I decided that my fiction was going to respect nothing. In the end, if in doubt, if I wanted it in the story and I could make it fit, I was going to go with that. The demands of the story, the demands of the character, the demands of the voice pushed me forward, gave me more propulsion than the demands of truth, whatever that may be. And I found a quote, and I put it in the afterword, actually, a quote from the philosopher and novelist George Santayana, who said, history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who weren't there. And I think I sort of decided to follow that, really. What's interesting is that it's actually the most implausible things in my book that are the most likely to be true, which is
well, I think it's interesting because this question springs to mind because it's a real story that you've made into a novel, but actually I suppose all novel writing is a process of blending fact and fiction, isn't it? All novel writing comes from your own experiences and things that are true to life, and then they're kind of made into a story.
Absolutely. I think all writing, really, I was going to say all good writing, but all writing, a lot of bad writing comes from this as well, but it's a blend of experience, imagination and observation, and all good pieces of writing will have those three elements in different proportions. So sometimes it might be nearly all imagination, but there'll still be trace elements of observation and experience in there. other bits of writing will be all experience, but they'll have elements of observation and imagination in there. And even people who are writing memoirs, that's a process of shaping and molding, and things are left out deliberately, other things are forgotten about, other things are giving emphasis that someone else who was there would have given a different emphasis. So yes, you're absolutely right. It's a blend of always fiction or non-fiction. It's a blend of truth, and people's perception of truth changes from day to day, and complete make-believe.
Was it difficult to take a character as kind of difficult as Stalin and write him in such a way that your audience was kind of engaged throughout the novel, and I'm guessing kind of emotionally enough invested in his story to kind of stick around to the end?
Well, I wouldn't say he's a totally sympathetic character in my book. One of the challenges, but one of the joys of this book was the fact that everyone sort of thinks they know Stalin, and they remember the photographs of the war, of him at Yalta or Potsdam. He's sort of a stolid geezer with this amazing tash, next to Churchill, and everyone's, people know about the gulags, and they know about the forced migrations, and they know about the Great Terror. But actually, Stalin in 1929, there's one thing is he looks completely different. Let's see if I can find. I've got a book here with it's got a great
young Stalin, yeah.
So many of you will have seen this photo, and he looks almost like a hipster poet. If you said that guy's in a band, that guy's in Black Country New Roads, you would think, well, yeah, he could be.
You can imagine him wandering around Shoreditch, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and he was incredibly compelling. I mean, he was only 5'4". He limped. He had one arm shorter than the other. He had a pockmarked skin, but he had an intensity of gaze that and a capacity for work. He was always there. He was always working. He was always organized. So he's not, in my book, a completely sympathetic character, but I wanted to, like I said earlier, he's at this pivotal moment. He's at a moment of change. He could go one way. His years as a poet weren't that far behind him. He could go that way, or he could go the way that he eventually chose, I suppose, or was forced into, as he would say.
I suppose that's kind of actually, in a way, creating a human character out of someone who has this reputation as dictator and really brutal. Not completely human, of course, but it is a way to, like you were saying, explore how a culture and a society at the time can create that, and can create this kind of revolution that happened. So I guess kind of what do you feel was the culture in London like at the time, or the European culture that kind of led to the revolution? That's a super broad question, but
it's a great question. It's given me a lot of scope. There's a few things. Stalin was always an outsider, so there were questions about his parentage as well. I mean, his father seemed to hate him, treated him really brutally. And one of the reasons for that may have been that there were rumors that Stalin's father wasn't his father, that actually it was the local priest who'd certainly arranged for Stalin to go to the seminary and given him an education which most of his peer group wouldn't have got. Where his father wanted him to, leave the seminary, become a shoemaker like he was. So Stalin was very bright and did well at the seminary, but though was expelled. It was expelled for getting other kids into trouble, actually. He also ruled the streets, so he could, hold his own in fist fights with the other kids. But he was an outsider in the communist leadership, because he, unlike most of them, he was genuinely proletarian, genuinely from a hard knocks background, and and he also was Georgian rather than Russian. He always spoke Russian with a heavy accent. He didn't even learn Russian until he was 9. and so that sense of outsiderdom carried on with him. But London of the time was interesting because it was full of revolutionaries. It was full of immigrant cultures, lots of Eastern Europeans, lots of Jewish refugees, lots of people from all over, including lots of revolutionaries. And there were lots of questions in Parliament about, as there are now sometimes, about this idea that revolution and terrorism is being fomented on the British streets, and there were lots of questions asked in Parliament and in the press about the links between the British Secret Service and the Russian Secret Service, and left-wing figures were tailed by British detectives, and their mail was intercepted, and it was a time when people feared a kind of, where the middle class and the ruling class feared that there might be, revolutionary activity in Britain, and that these foreign subversives on the streets might, you might stimulate that.
You talked a little bit at the very beginning of this about kind of today, and this is your first kind of historical novel, if I'm right. I'm wondering, and from what I understand, the rest of your books are kind of, they often talk about masculinity and how that ties into the culture, and I kind of see masculinity as being a bit in crisis at the moment. I wonder if you can see any parallels between the time that you're writing about in this novel and today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think so. I have written, generally, if you wanted to boil them down, about men who are out of their depths, men who have lost their bearings, who are trying to lead decent lives, but are under pressure in a world that's changing and they don't really understand. So that was that, and lots of people write about those kind of things. And I think when I first started writing, I was unusual in that I wrote about men in family situations, men trying to cope with domestic lives, which isn't really a sphere that many male writers have gone to before. But I think I had said all I had to say in a kind of straightforward, look at the world, isn't it mad? Look at men, aren't they in trouble? All of that kind of thing. I think I probably explored all of that. And then I'm writing about Stalin. And of course, in some ways, he's he's another man out of his depth, though the depths are deeper and the stakes are higher. And but he's also, pulled between his dreams of revolution and his dreams of advancement, and how you have a family life, and he's a new dad, so he's under some of the same kind of pressures. And it only really occurred to me afterwards is that he was a extreme example of some of the blokes I'd been writing about before. I mean, we think of Stalin in some ways as the ultimate alpha male. He has everybody else bumped off in order to stay ahead of the herd. But at this period, he was very much a beta male. No one thought, one of the reasons he was able to rise so fast, or so far, so quickly, is that he did it almost silently. No one thought of him as a real threat until it was too late, actually. So yes, he's and his relationship with his mother is interesting. She completely doted on him. He was an only child, but he was an only child because the other siblings had died. And that obviously, I don't know if it's survivor's guilt or whether that was a factor in his father disowning him. That so he had a difficult relationship with his own father, and a overwhelming relationship with his mother, and was under all sorts of pressures, pressures at work of a night. So, so he's not so different. He's an extreme dramatization of that.
Yeah, taken to the global stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a great quote that in the Independent from you, actually, that I read, which is, "The type of men I write about live outside big cities, lack self-confidence, and rarely feature in contemporary fiction. Even Nick Hornby's characters are more sorted than mine," which I thought was great. And I haven't read this book because it's out today, but I did read We Don't Die of Love, which was very kindly lent to me by Ian Harker. and I kind of, yeah, I really like books that are about, you know, and often I read them about kind of women in their early 20s who are, you know, spiraling into crisis. But there was something of that kind of, yeah, crisis, like your life in crisis in a kind of domestic way that I felt quite, you know, drawn to, and I found really interesting. What do you think it is about seeing more kind of useless or down and out or unlucky or nasty versions of ourselves in fiction that we find so appealing?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, We Don't Die of Love. I'm glad you liked it. I'm assuming you liked it. That's actually set in Holbeck, as you probably,
Yeah.
no, I changed it slightly because real Holbeck didn't quite suit, so I had to change it. And also, I wanted to perhaps be a little bit more universal. But so it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think there's a line, Jack Kerouac had this line about, you know, the mad ones are the ones that interest me, the ones that are that talk and are expansive. And I can't remember the quote. The other's obviously much better than me, but he talks about loving these big, messed up figures. And I sort of think the opposite, really. I find those people annoying. I mean, what I like is the quietly messed up, the people, and also the people that keep plugging on despite you know, getting deeper and deeper into trouble. And I think there are parallels. I think, you know, the people talk about the quarter life crisis, don't they? Where you know, you're 25 and how am I going to get a house? How am I going to, you know, what do you have to do to sustain a relationship? Or how do you, you know, how do you get yourself settled? And actually, it's the same, but much worse. Knocking on the door of 60, you think, you know, those things don't go away, except you've just got a lot less time to resolve it. So I think I think there's a sort of hope that life will somehow resolve itself neatly and you'll be able to sort it. But for lots of people, that isn't the case. And even if it is the case, even if you have sort of got it sorted, there will come a moment where you think, oh, is this all there is? Is this all there is? And then what I noticed before I wrote that book is that in the small town where I live, there were lots of long-term relationships were breaking up. Nobody had done anything bad. Nobody had run off with anyone, but people had just got relationships had just run out of steam. And it was often the woman who thought, right, you know, the mortgage is paid off, the kids have left home, we can have fun now, we can do all those exciting things. Blokes were like, oh, I can watch box sets and I can watch football, and now I can just relax, I can let the waters close over my head. And you know, it was that kind of tension where people go, no, where one partner, usually the woman, was saying, no, I want a more exciting life, and one partner was going, well, this is great, isn't it? And I think those tensions, they rear up in a dramatic form before you know, inverted commas, settle down into a relationship, and then they rear up at the other end where you think, well, we've got this amount of time left, what should we do with it? Obviously a bit different with Stalin, but you know, still some of the same pressures there. 29, young child, you know, what's he gonna do with his life? And really dramatized by the fact that if he gets it wrong, he might get a bullet in the back of his head. So
yeah. What I liked about your character in We Don't Die of Love was Luke, I think he's called, that his kind of jadedness and cynicism was drawn with a lot of humor, and that, you know, that was one of the kind of enjoyable aspects to it. I think this kind of, you know, that this kind of bad behavior can seem, you know, kind of in ourselves can be redeemed in a way if we're funny about it.
Yeah, no, I hope so. And I mean, I saw someone, there's been a lot of, you know, social media chat, hasn't there, about people about the Ukrainian president, you know, Zelensky, and you know, he was the Ukrainian voice of Paddington, and he won Strictly Come Dancing, and all of these things. And people are saying, you know, and people saying, oh, you know, all men have got to accept that everyone's got a crush on him, all their wives got a bit of a crush on him now, and then I'm sort of joining in with that. I was saying, you know, his Paddington was more moving than most people's King Lear. And it was all kind of, and then there'd be somebody going, oh, you know, don't you realize this is a war on, real people are getting killed, it's too, you know, this is too trivial. But I was thinking, it's very human, including the people that are actually there, you know, to joke about. I mean, one of the great sights of this whole horrible Ukrainian war, but one of the shafts of silver lining was when a guy in a tractor steals a Russian tank, you know, tows it away, you know, and you can hear people laughing around there. I saw another one where a Russian tank had run out of petrol and a Ukrainian stops and says, "Oh, can I give you a tow back to Russia?" You know, people make jokes, people have humor, people.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think people have responded to in Zelensky, and if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, I apologize, is that he's the anti-Putin. I mean, Putin is very much in that Stalin mold, that he's humorless, he's dead-eyed, he's, you know, very focused on getting what he wants by all means necessary. Whereas the Ukrainian president is very human, and, you know, he's down on the streets, he's taking selfies, and you know, and part of that humanity is the ability to make jokes at moments of crisis, or to laugh at yourself, or to laugh at the situation you found yourself in, or to acknowledge. I mean, one of the things I say in this book is that the more power people have, the less funny they are, the more they rise up. You know, Boris Johnson got a reputation for being a funny man. He hasn't been funny for probably 20 years, you know. The laughing Boris Johnson that you've got of "Have I got news for you?" Well, he's dead, he's gone, you know, like, because he's got real power now, and he wants to hang on to it at all costs. And I think you see it in billionaires, you see it. Ordinary people are very funny. Ordinary people in crisis are very funny. People that are full of themselves, people that have got a position they feel they're scared to lose, they're never funny. So I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I'm surrounded by funny people all the time.
But I think you're right. I think that's what is, you know, I think that's what's really kind of exciting about your novel, is that it's a more human take on, you know, if you wanted to learn about the Russian Revolution of Stalin, you could read a textbook, but it's not the same really as reading a novel. And it's a completely different perspective, which I think is really exciting. And I'm excited to read it, actually.
Oh, good. Oh, very good.
I guess my kind of last questions are, you've called yourself a late developer before. You didn't start writing for a while. So I wonder what your kind of, what's the secret deciding to make a new career work at any point in your life, really?
Well, I suppose you just have to dive in. But I had, I used to write a lot as a kid, and then I did the worst thing you can do if you want to be a writer. I went to university to study English literature. It's a disaster. You know, if your world becomes full of books by geniuses, and how can you add to that? And so I stopped. I also, you know, attention problems, and got distracted by the usual things that people get distracted by. I also had children very young. I had my first daughter when I was just 22, while I was still at university. And the thing about having children is that you have to have food in the fridge. You don't have the luxury of just, you know, bumming around the world or sitting in coffee shops writing all day. You just have to work, essentially. And then I had other children. So I was always, you know, the demands of working, which is true. I mean, I really believe that most people have rich creative inner lives. There's not a split between the creative personality, and I spent 10 years doing very boring jobs, very menial jobs. So, you know, I worked in warehouses, and I spent a lot of time filing and photocopying and answering the phone. And all the people I was surrounded with were incredibly talented. You know, people ran judo teams, or they restored classic cars, or, you know, or they were great musicians. And people dream of winning the lottery, not so that they can just retire or sit on a beach. Most people, they dream of winning it so they can devote more time to doing what they really love. And that is often a creative thing. And I think a writer who doesn't write, John Irving said this, a writer who doesn't write will always be slightly miserable. And I think for a long time I was slightly miserable. And then I started I don't know what drew me back to doing it. I think, I mean, I went on a course, I went on an album course, but I was working as a teacher, and I just started going back to what I'd loved as a kid. And then gradually it became like a kind of OCD thing. I couldn't, or like exercise, I couldn't not do it. I felt weirder not doing it. And then I had, I got some people gave me a lot of encouragement. I had a book published, and then suddenly you realize it's possible. And I do wish I'd started earlier, but somebody said, the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago, but the second best time is now. And so, you have to, and once I'd started, well, you can keep going. And there is this idea that, you have to be young, and people can just feel that they're too, you can feel that you're too old at 26. I mean, I learned to drive at 26 and thought, oh my God, I'm the oldest driver in the world, the oldest learner driver. And people can say, oh, I'm too old to start writing at 30. I'm too old at 40 and whatever. And I was 44 when my first book came out, and I felt really old. But now I think, that's 15 years ago. And now I think, oh my God, I was a crazy young kid of 44. So I think the thing to do, to answer your question more seriously, is you just have to sort of take a breath and leap in.
Yeah.
But it's okay to keep a safety net. I think it is okay to keep one foot in the real world. You don't want to burn all your boats down or bridges down or whatever the phrase is.
And at the opposite end of the spectrum, I guess, what is next? Can you tell us? Have you got anything else in the works, or is it a kind of, it's still post? I mean, it's only just come out, so
yeah. But I like these characters, and I might treat them more. I mean, I had thought this book would be a bit of a diversion. It's only about those 3 weeks in London, but I think you start discovering lots of connections. And so I discovered that Marlene Dietrich and Rosa Luxemburg and various other figures that were all living in a district at the same time, just as the German Empire was collapsing at the end of the First World War. And I thought, well, actually, I might do something similar. It won't be Stalin. I also thought that some of the minor characters in this book, like Edith Gerard, who taught the judo to the suffragettes, there were moments where I thought, no, this book should really be about her. Or Ellie Vuoco, who was who fought in the Finnish Civil War, and they had these women-only regiments in the Finnish Civil War, about which I knew nothing. I'm thinking, actually, I'd like to explore that. So I'm at the moment of thinking, I've got lots of ideas connected with some of the characters in this book, but I don't know exactly what form that will take. I might leave that to my unconscious. If you're serious about writing a book, your unconscious will lead you to the right.
Yeah,
is my hope.
Wonderful.
How's the festival going?
Huh?
How's
the festival? Yeah, it's great actually. So this is podcast number 2.
Wow.
So we've got a couple more to go, and yeah, all of the events have been really great so far. So yeah, I've just been at the library, but I'll be at the Carriage Works for Saturday doing some workshops.
Well, you're very lucky, because I mean the library is one of my favorite places in the world. It's and so obviously nobody's been going anywhere.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen, so much for chatting to me. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
For listeners or watchers, Sell Us the Rope it's out today, published by Sandstone Press. So do get your hands on a copy. There we go.
Hilary Mantel loves it. I feel I should say that.
I was impressed by that, to be honest. I saw it and I was like, oh gosh, I feel a bit nervous now.
So I'm going to tell the viewers. Hilary Mantel said, original, adept and confident. What can I say except I'd wish I'd written it myself? When that email came through from the publishers saying this is what Hilary said, I nearly fainted. She is the queen.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to read it. If you want to find out more about the LitFest, that is leedslitfest.co.uk for tickets and things. And you've got a website, haven't you, as well?
I have, www.sdmay.com.
Wonderful. Have a fantastic time at your book launch this evening. I have a feeling that if I end the streaming,